and welcome back to another episode of the Usagi Podjimbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike, and we got two good, amazing stories for you guys today. We are looking at issue 7. Yeah, issue 7, volume 2. We are looking at The Music of Heaven, and we are looking at part 2 of Battlefield. So we're going to get into that story as well. But first, we're going to start out with the main story of this issue, which is Music of Heavens. So our story starts out, looks pretty damp. Usagi is still wearing all the garb. I guess he got some new stuff because he got rid of that other stuff in the last issue for a lizard's tail. But he's still wearing all his winter clothes, and it's really wet, it seems like. I don't know if he's in a different part of the, maybe he's traveling down south. I don't know exactly. But there's no more snow, because there was snow in the last issue. But we see Usagi, he unsheaths his sword, and he kind of goes like, "Oh, I know someone's there. You know, you've been following me. Show yourself." Usagi is very much on edge in this issue, and he's like, "No use hiding. You know, I know you're there." And what do we get? We get the Tokage from the last issue. That they show up, and he's like, "Oh man, like I thought I finally lost y'all, but apparently no, he didn't." And Usagi's like, "I can't feed you guys anymore. You know, get out of here, scram, scat. You know, you heard me. Get out of here." And the Tokage, they end up leaving. Sadly, I love the little Tokage, but they left. And Usagi says, "Oh, that was easy enough. You know, I wonder why they didn't do that earlier." He says, and he has this like look on his face. He's like, "Oh, what's this? I hear some music coming from a direction in the forest from where the Tokage ran off to. I wonder exactly what's going on." And we see the Tokage listening to a man. He's playing like a flute, and he has like a basket over his head. And Usagi walks up to him, and he's like, "Oh, that was very beautiful. I've never heard such a thing before." It's the particular type of instrument he's actually playing is called the shakuhachi. Shakuhachi? I'm just gonna call it a flute. It looks like a flute, but it's a special flute made of like a particular type of bamboo. And this guy is playing, and Usagi is very much mesmerized by what this mysterious man is actually playing, and how it attracts the Tokage. And the man, he's actually a monk. He's a monk, but he says, "Oh no, it's okay. You know, my playing isn't that good. Would you care to come and have some fish with me that he's caught?" And he's like, "There's more in my backpack. Don't worry about it." And Usagi's like, "I don't know, but I guess if you insist, we can totally break bread together, And Usagi does his normal spiel where he's like, "Oh, my name is Miyamoto Usagi. I'm a wandering samurai," as they're eating the fish over the fire. He's like, "Yeah, the man he says, we have one thing in common. I'm a wanderer too. They call me Omori Kazana, a Komuso, a priest from the Faki sects of Zen Buddhism." I think I just butchered that name. That was just a hard name to pronounce. And Usagi's like, "Oh, the Komuso. I know them. They're the monks of emptiness, is what they're called." And the monk starts explaining, all about his garb and why he wears the upside down trash can lid on his head, and stuff like that. It's to basically be detached from the world. But Usagi says, "Oh, but you still carry swords." And the monk is like, "Oh yeah, I still carry swords because sometimes you might need them. You never know when you actually need them. But normally, I don't need to use my swords. But sometimes you never know." He prefers to actually fight with his flute, which, I mean, that's kind of cool. Kind of like a bardish type of thing. Like, "I'm just gonna mesmerize you with my music," is what the monk actually says, But Usagi and the monk are in agreement. Music is wondrous, according to both of them. Then we get into the big meat and potatoes of this issue, which they start talking about the different kinds of music, the music of nature, the music of heaven, and stuff like that, and how nature can provide so much music around you and stuff like that. It's a very in-depth conversation, and honestly, it was a lot to take in this particular issue, but it's really interesting to see their philosophies intertwine with each other, it seems like, when it comes to music and stuff. And when he starts talking about, like, the music of heaven and stuff like that, like the music of heaven only really happens apparently when you're on death's door, it seems like. From what I got from this, is you're on death's door and you can hear like a certain kind of music that nobody else can really hear. The monk excuses himself and he's like, I have a far travel tomorrow and I'm gonna awake at dawn, and they end up telling each other good night, and they sleep. The monk sleeps next to the fire, and Usagi ends up curling up on some brush, it seems like, and Usagi ends up going to sleep, and he's like, oh, there's nothing out of the ordinary, because at the beginning of the story, Usagi was very much on edge, and he sensed things that he thought were there, but they weren't there. And he's like, and Usagi goes to sleep. He's like, oh, probably just my imagination. And we get this little spider guy show up the next day. This little spider. He ends up crawling up on Usagi. And Usagi jumps up in the air. And he's like, I hate spiders. Ugh, I hate when they're walking up on me. I hate it. It gives me the creeps. And Usagi gets up and he sees that the fire has kind of died down. And he's like, oh, it's sun. The sun has rised already, It looks like it's going to be a really, really nice day. As Usagi gets his things together, he notices that the monk is gone. Like he said he was going to be gone. And, he was such a nice guy, Usagi says. I hope he finds what he's looking for exactly. Usagi hears some rustling in the brush. And he's like, oh, hey, how's it going, Komuso, it's good to see you. I thought you were already left. And he's like, hey, can you, I'm just trying to start a fire. Can you help me out? Get some wood for me and stuff? And we see the Tokage are still there hanging out around them. And he's like, Usagi says, there's gonna be, they're gonna be nice, it's gonna be nice, I guess, the embers are still pretty hot. And, did you get more wood? And we see the Tokage, so they start hissing because the monk has slowly drawn his sword, and Usagi's like, oh, what's all this hissing for? What are you doing? And he turns around, and Usagi catches the blade of the sword in between his hands, falling over onto the ember, burning him. It ends up kind of burning his shoulder and sort of his garb that he was wearing. And the monk comes down and slashes the fire, but misses Usagi because Usagi rolls out of the way. And Usagi jumps up and he's like, "What are you doing? You're not Komasu. You're not him. Who are you?" And the monk, he says, "Oh, you recognize me, Ronin." And the monk takes off his bucket from his head, his mask, I guess you want to call it, his headwear. And we see Usagi's like, oh, you're one of the assassins who call themselves Shi. I thought you were all dead or captured. And this is the guy who had the spear, and he was the one who got trapped in like the warehouse of all like the grain and stuff like that. He was in their storehouse from that issue a couple issues ago. And he's like, you killed my partners, Ronin, but I was just buried under the storehouse under bales of rice. I managed to work my way free and escape. Then I swore my vengeance. And Usagi's like, you're the one who's been following me. He's like, yes, I wanted to strike you sooner, but your senses are too well honed and for an ambush on you. And the assassin says, damn those lizards, when the Komasu left you this morning, I waylaid him and took his clothes, and Knowing this disguise would catch you unaware, I decided to put it on. And then the assassin says, they're having like a standoff, and he says, thinking about going for your swords, Ronin? Don't do it. Don't you even try it. I'll kill you even before you unsheath one of those. But then you have nothing to lose, don't you? And he has like a evil grin on his face. And Usagi jumps for his sword, grabbing it and quickly holding it up in the air, blocking the assassin's sword with his sheath. And Usagi goes and grabs his other sword and stabs the assassin in basically like the side of the chest area. He falls to the ground and he ends up dying. And Usagi says, you quickly find Kamuso. He tells the Tokage is this. We're going to go look for him, make sure he's not going to die. They end up finding the monk in a pool of his own blood. It is actually a mortal wound, and Usagi tells the monk that he was an old enemy and it was my fault. And the monk's like, no, you can't blame yourself for this. He starts to cough. He's like, and he like slowly tries to play his flute. And Usagi's like, come on, it's going to be okay. And, the monk says, it's all right, my friend. The end is near for me. And he's like, do you listen to that? Listen, Usagi, do you hear that? The music is so beautiful. And Usagi's like, what? I don't hear anything. He's like, listen. And as the monk slowly dies, Usagi's like, yes, I hear it now. The faint haunting echo drifting. It's like it's gone now. Was it really there, or did I just imagine it? What was it? And he asks the monk. And the monk has sadly passed away. Later on, Usagi ends up burying the monk. He gets all his gear together. Well, the gear Usagi had, and he gets his flute, the monk's flute. He's like, I regret that I only got to know you for a short time. I'll report your death to one of the sect of your temple. And Usagi gets ready to go. He puts on his hat, and he's like, are you guys coming with me? And the Tokage end up not leaving. They end up staying at the gravesite. And Usagi's like, no, well, take care of yourselves. And Usagi wanders off again to let them know that the monk has died, the people of the monk's temple. And Usagi says, I hate to admit it, but I think I'm going to miss those guys. And that's where our issue ends. So my thoughts on the music of Heaven, to be exact, it's not a bad story. I do feel like that the whole music aspect really kind of lost me, and it kind of drew me out of the story because there was so much I felt like exposition in this particular story. It wasn't bad, just personally for my taste. I couldn't really get into it, to be exact, but I did like the twist towards the end where they connected it to the Shi story, because to be honest, I thought all the Shi assassins were dead, but to see him pop back up, the assassin, was a really interesting callback to a story that I did somewhat enjoy. I did enjoy the Shi story for the most part. But seeing that come back, I really did like it. In all honesty, like, this was kind of like a really sad story, and I felt like, to be exact, it was almost like how I interpreted it, how somebody deals with getting ready to basically die. Because in reality, none of us know what exactly happens when we die, to be the exact, and that's what I kind of interpreted in my head, personally. But all in all, it's not a terrible one-off. I did enjoy most of it. I like that it did have connections as well. back to the lizard's tail, which is the one we covered before. I thought that was hysterical to see those guys back, and I hope they come back again. I hope the lizard, the Tokage, those particular Tokage come back again. But that's kind of how I feel about said story. It was really interesting. I liked the fighting in it. The fighting was pretty cool. Very well done as always. But yeah, it was a decent story. Didn't necessarily wet my whistle, or wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I do appreciate it for what it exactly is. Now moving on to part 2 of Battlefield, an Usagi story where Usagi is learning about what actually is war, what actually war is all about, to be exact. So it's been 2 days since the battle, and Katsuichi and Usagi are walking through the battlefield because they got to the battlefield at the end of the previous story, or the previous part of the story. And Katsuichi says, it's been 2 days, like I said, since the battle. The wounded have been carried away. Don't wander too far, Usagi. There's still danger here. And there are bodies all strewn about, all dead, some impaled on spears and swords and stuff like that. And Usagi's like, this is horrible. Why would anybody glorify this? And Katsuichi says, death is inevitable in war. In fact, the more dead, the greater the victory. And Usagi turns to him and he's like, that is insane. And Katsuichi says, yes, you're learning, boy. See those people over there? And Usagi says, yeah, they're peasants, but what are they doing on the battlefield? And Katsuichi points out they are actually collecting the arms and armor of the dead warriors to sell later. And Usagi kind of gets a mad, mean look on his face, like a angry look on his face, and he's like, "But swords, but the sword is the samurai's soul. To have it stolen by a peasant would be to die double death, apparently." And Katsuichi says yes, because we've actually learned before that, way before that, the sword is the soul of the samurai, and it's very important to said samurai. And we see them, the peasants actually going around gathering all the different swords and armor and stuff like that. And I think it's Usagi says, or maybe it's Katsuichi, I don't really know exactly, but one of them says, and may the gods help those profiteers after they are caught, which is interesting to see, which I'm guessing that's Katsuichi saying that. And Usagi happens to glance at a wakizashi, which is a shorter sword, as Katsuichi is walking away, and Katsuichi says, come along, let's go. And Usagi is just mesmerized by this weapon. And he's like, oh, wakizashi, it's beautiful. And he sees the other peasants going around collecting the swords, and he looks back at them. He looks back at Katsuichi, and Usagi says that it's better that I should have it than someone, some looter. And Usagi ends up going to grab the wakizashi. And he grabs it from the dead soldier, and the soldier kind of like turns and kind of looks at Usagi, but he's already dead. It's a kind of a little gruesome, terrifying scene, and the soldier ends up falling over into some water. And Usagi is kind of shocked, and we hear Usagi off in the background. Somebody saying it's Katsuichi, and he's like, I'm coming, I'm coming. And Katsuichi ends up saying, the rain will be here soon. It is time we go. And Usagi's like, yeah, let's go. And as he has the wakizashi behind his back, and Katsuichi tells him not to dawdle. Later on, we see Usagi with this water pail and the wakizashi. And Usagi says, this is a good hiding place. I'll just take one look at it before I fetch the water. And he's like, oh, it's beautiful. I bet this can cut through anything. Usagi hears something in the distance, and he's like, oh, nothing. It's nothing. I must be hearing things. Must be the wind. Must be my imagination. And he's like, oh, it must be my imagination, yeah. And he's like, oh, I better go get some water. And he goes and hides the sword. And he's like, into your hiding place now, sword. So he's talking to his swords now. Usagi ends up going to go fetch some water, and he goes to get it, and in the reflection he actually sees the face of the man who he actually took the sword from. He gets scared and actually splashes into the water, and he's like, oh man, not again. My mind must be playing tricks on me. And Usagi goes to carry the water up the hill like he always does for Katsuichi, and you hear Usagi. And Usagi gets scared, and he's like, Sensei, oh, it's you. And you see Katsuichi holding like a big, giant bale of like straw. It seemed like straw. And he's like, of course it's me. Who else would it be? How'd you get so wet? And Usagi's like, the rocks were really slippery. And Katsuichi tells Usagi, well, you better go get changed before you catch a cold. Later on that night, it is actually storming out. Katsuichi predicted the future. He felt the rain clouds coming in, but he predicted it. He predicted the future. And Usagi is scared. He ends up hearing a noise, and he's like, oh, I hear, who are you? Are you there? What's going on? And here's a bakadoom. And we see somebody at the entrance, and it looks a lot like the fallen samurai from the beginning of this issue. And he's like, and he comes after Usagi coming in to the house, and Usagi runs, and he's like, Sensei, wake up. And when Sensei turns to wake up, it's the man who is dead. And we see that I guess that morning, after Usagi had the terrifying event, Katsuichi wakes up and he's like, oh man, he has like a crack in his back and stuff. And he's like, oh, my back is starting to feel my age. And Katsuichi tells Usagi to wake up. It's time to prepare our morning meal, Usagi. And Usagi is not there. Usagi is gone. Where is Usagi? Who knows where Usagi is? We'll have to find out in part 3. But this is a fun little backup story. I always say this, but I love seeing younger Usagi stories and how it molds and shapes Usagi. This definitely does that. It's a good little middle part to the story. This is a very short little story in this issue. I like how they explain more about war and how people profit off of it and stuff like that. It was really interesting to see. It was really interesting to see how Usagi justified his actions versus the actions of the peasants, and how his actions were obviously justified as being good because he was going to be a samurai eventually. So a samurai should technically have the weapon of a samurai, and we're not going to let the greedy peasants get their hands on it, obviously. But I'm really curious to see, because I don't remember what happens. I'm curious to see if the item ends up being cursed, a lot like the hairpin that we saw in that one short story a long time ago. Or if this is Usagi's actually, like, his mind is actually playing tricks on him. Because I don't remember exactly what happened, to say the least. But yeah, it is what it is. It's a fun little story to see, and seeing Usagi wig out about spirits trying to come after him because he stole something from somebody is a lot of fun to see. Poor Usagi is definitely at his wit's end, and we'll see how that ends with in the next episode. But I just want to say thanks to everybody for continuously listening to the podcast. I have officially reached 50 episodes of the podcast, which is quite a big milestone when starting out on a new podcast. And I've actually hit like a year, my 1 year anniversary for doing the podcast itself. But I want to say thank you to everybody who takes the time to listen to the podcast. It really, really means a lot to me. to see that people actually want to listen to me and hear my thoughts and opinions talking about Usagi Yojimbo. Because I know Usagi is very much like, I don't want to say like an underground like sensation. Like there's not many Usagi Yojimbo podcasts out there. There's me, and then there's the Ronin Rabbit. So I mean, there's two of us out there. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody who wants to listen and enjoys listening to the podcast. I don't know if I would continue if nobody really listened to the podcast. Because that's very much a motivating to keep on going, is that people like to continuously listen to this podcast. And a lot of podcasts don't even make it to 50 episodes because a lot of people do get very, very much discouraged when making podcasts. Because podcasts are hard to make sometimes, and it's hard to find your audience. But I feel like I found my niche within the comic book podcasting world, because I picked such a niche to talk about. It's like a niche of a niche to talk about, to say the least, But I'll say thank you, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. And stay safe, and go read some Usagi Yojimbo.